We'll try this again. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Iyer, and we are here today to talk about the final steps for your hazard mitigation plan. It's been a good couple of months that we've been working on it, really pulling in as a team effort, pulling data and information and thoughts from everybody to make this a much stronger document. So what we're going to do today is we're just going to take a quick overview, high spin of it. We're going to remind you that there are indeed copies here and copies online for you to take a look through if you want to. And up until the very final second that we submitted to both the state of New Mexico and even to FEMA for review. Nevada. FEMA. Did I say FEMA?
New Mexico.
New Mexico. Sorry, I was just in New Mexico last week, so my brain is still there. But once we set it up to FEMA for review, we will take comments all the way up till then. So if you have time to read it, if you want to read it, if you want to chat with me about it, I am always available to talk to you about this document because we think it's so very important for the community. What I'd like to do is take us through a quick PowerPoint talking about what we did, what our final steps are, and kind of a review of some of the things in the plan to make sure that everybody is still on the same page. I want to remind you that, again, there's still a comment period open, so don't worry if you haven't got to it. I understand that everybody's got jobs, sometimes 3 or 4, and that's how it works. But if you do get a chance, we would ask you to take a look at the plan itself. So, quick introductions. We already took care of that. But this is your project team. This is who's working on it. I've had my GIS people and my backups working on it, reviewing the document, making sure I don't put my foot in my mouth too terribly often to make sure that we have a great, really holistic, community-wise plan that can be used to inform decisions in the future. And I think that that's a document that we have right here. So we don't need to introduce ourselves. We got that all done. But what I want to do is I want to review why we're doing hazard mitigation. For those of you who are in the first meeting or have been involved in this at all, you'll remember a lot of this. But it's always good to look at it and say, hey, why the heck are we doing this? What is the purpose of this? Hazard mitigation, really the idea behind it is taking sustained long-term actions that make your community safer. We all recognize that there's disasters out there, for lack of a better word, that are going to knock us off our feet or could potentially knock us off our feet. And the more resilient we are as a community before it happens, the quicker and better we'll bounce back. That's what hazard mitigation has to do with, to make sure that we are as strong and resilient as we can be. Now, hazard mitigation planning does a lot of stuff. But again, I mentioned this earlier on, and I'll mention it probably a couple more times. What it does is it provides you with a roadmap to aid in the creation and revision of policies and procedures that make sure that you, in the long run, are safer communities. The idea with this document is that you can use it as a springboard when you are looking at passing ordinances, revising policies, writing other plans, deciding what you'd like to do with capital expenditures. This is a plan that you can look at and say, how can we make all of these projects, all of these ordinances, all of these things better for the community? Now, it helps in a lot of ways, and I've talked about most of these, but we want to build that safer future for all your citizens. We want to make sure that everybody is looked after as best as possible. Nye County, as you know, is a gigantic county. And one of the things that we want to do is we want to make it so that you all work together better, that you cooperate better. And in working on that holistic approach with this plan, that's what we tried to do. We tried to pull you all together so that we can move forward in the same direction. We want to identify what hazards can knock you down. There's a long list of hazards that are potential, but what we wanted to focus on are the ones that we're really worried about in the community. And so again, working with you, we narrowed that list down to what we thought were realistic hazards for Nye County. We want to help you with that budgeting. Again, if someone hands your community a bag of money and says, go out and make things safer for your folks, what are you going to spend that money on? How are you going to spend that money on? What's a sensible path to take with that? And that's what this document helps you think about. And then finally, one of the big goals on this was to outreach to citizens to make sure that everybody in the county, if they're interested, can get in on this program, can give their feedback on this program, and maybe can learn a little bit about how they can make themselves safer. And so those were the goals. That's as we were chasing to do this. Now, hazard mitigation planning has also got another positive side to it. If you have an approved hazard mitigation plan, you actually can access grant funding, certain streams of grant funding that are inaccessible if you don't have an approved hazard mitigation plan. The first big one is HMGP, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. Now that actually kicks in after a presidentially declared disaster in the state. And what happens is a percentage of that disaster amount gets sequestered into the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. And that funding becomes available to communities who have an approved hazard mitigation plan to do identified projects. And so what happens is, hey, they're going to say, look, we had a disaster declared in the state of Nevada, and we have this amount of money. We're going to release this amount of money to people who have an approved hazard mitigation plan where they can try to get the money to do projects. Now, there's always a catch with this. You can apply for the grant funding, but there's no guarantee you're going to get it, right? There's no guarantees in this. The second catch is this. When you get that grant funding, there's a required 25% match. So if you say we're going to do $1 million project, you have to match $250,000. And so again, when we talk about that sensible budgeting and sensible writing of plans, we want you to think a little bit longer term on this. If we want to do this project, if we want to apply for grant funding, we are going to have this amount of money to be able to do it. And so it's a little bit of a longer term game on this. Now, the other thing with this is that nothing says that any of that grant funding has to be cash. It can be in-kind donations. And by that, I mean people donating their time, people donating equipment, people donating their expertise. There's a huge list of things that you can get credit for in-kind donation to meet that 25% match. But again, that takes a little bit of planning and budgeting and thinking about it before you dive into the pool for it. Now, there's another much bigger hazard mitigation program out there called BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. And what BRIC does is it takes a very big federal pot of money and it allocates out smaller amounts to each state. So each state gets an amount. And then it has a big pool of competitive grant funding opportunities out there that if you have an approved hazard mitigation plan, you can apply for. Again, the same constraints that were on the hazard mitigation grant program apply to BRIC as well. Now, there are all sorts of other grant programs out there that you can apply for with an approved hazard mitigation plan. And beyond that, with an approved hazard mitigation plan, many of the grants that you apply for that aren't prerequisites, or it's not a prerequisite to have an approved plan, actually give you credit for having an approved plan. So there's lots and lots of positives to having this document. Okay, our goals and steps for the project. So we've worked through a lot of things here, but we identified at the start of this what we thought were 3 achievable goals. The goal 1 is to reduce the risk to people and property from identified hazards. That's the whole definition of hazard mitigation planning. Goal 2 is a little bit of a subset of that. What we want to do is we want to work to protect vulnerable populations and structures and critical facilities from the effects of those hazards. When we talk about vulnerable populations, one of the very big things we talk about in the plan is folks who maybe can't necessarily protect themselves. We're thinking of the elderly or the young or folks with disabilities or folks who speak a language other than English. And we look at those as potentially vulnerable populations. And one of the things we want to do is we want to work to protect them. Now, going hand in glove with that is protecting our critical facilities, our response capabilities, because we can do hazard mitigation until the cows come home, but we can't protect against everything. We just can't. And so one of the things we want to do is we want to make sure that our response capabilities are as robust as they can. So if we do get knocked down, or more accurately, when we do get knocked down, we have the capability to go out and help people as quickly as humanly possible. And finally, goal 3 was those public outreach initiatives. One of the things we pushed very hard on this plan. And the idea with that is that the more educated our citizens get about the hazards that can impact them and what they can do to mitigate against it, the more resilient we all are as a community. And so again, that public outreach initiative, we talked about how we did it with the plan, and we actually dedicate sections of the plan on how we would like to continue doing it during the life of this plan. Okay, These are the steps we've taken. So we've reviewed the plan, we've written the plan, we've done the meetings, we've solicited that public input, we've looked at our risks, we've looked at our assets, we've developed those mitigation action items. And if your community hasn't reviewed those yet, especially if you're a representative of that community, again, we encourage you to go into the plan and look at those identified mitigation action items. They are the, if someone handed my community a bag of money, these are the actions we would like to take with that bag of money. Now, there's some good news with that. Those can always be revised during the life of the plan. If something comes up and you say to yourself, hey, you know what? We have another action that we would like to consider. Nothing says that you can't add and revise the plan with an action. But these are the starting point. And what we want to do is we want to look at each identified hazard and identify actions for our community that protect against those hazards. So let's talk briefly in terms of our risks, our identified risks. And one of the things that we use in the plan right here is the National Risk Index. That's actually something created by FEMA, where they take a lot of metrics, and with those metrics, they give us an idea of the risk to a county. This is the National Risk Index equation right here. It takes what we call the expected annual loss. So that's the component of naturally occurring hazards and what we expect to lose from the occurrence of those naturally occurring hazards. No, that's okay. We've got things beeping. My popcorn is done. We take the social vulnerability. So what is the social vulnerability of our communities? How vulnerable are we? What kind of response capabilities do we have? What kind of population do we have? And then we look at our community resilience, how strong we are, how capable we are to recover. And what we get what we call the National Risk Index. And so for Nye County, what we did is we kicked this out. We took a look at the things in here and we said, all right, what is our social vulnerability there? And you can see that our social vulnerability is relatively high. And so that's not so great for us. But if we go and we look at our community resilience, we see that our community resilience is very low. Now, I look at the community resilience and social vulnerability as a component of a whole bunch of things, but really I look at distances between communities, response capabilities of communities, funding of communities, infrastructure in place in those communities. And as you guys all know, Nye County, very spread out, not a lot of resources in some of our more rural areas, and not a lot of response capabilities in some of those rural areas. And so that's why we get those high vulnerability, low resilience scores. And then what we do is we take a look at our risk index here. Now, this is a conglomeration of all the identified hazards by FEMA, and it gives us a relatively moderate risk index for us. And what we did with this is we took this as a jumping off point and we identified all of the hazards in your plan. We said, hey, we're looking at all these hazards and some of them are identified as very, very low. For example, avalanche. There's not a very big avalanche risk in the county. Now, I'm not saying there isn't one, but what I am saying is that we looked at the history of an avalanche occurrence and we couldn't find any occurrence that actually did anything, right? That damaged anything or hurt or killed anybody. And so we looked at that and we said, if someone handed our community, if someone handed, let's just say blanket Nye County, a bag of money and said, go make your community safer, would we try to mitigate against avalanches? And the answer is absolutely no. Or, I'm sorry, my answer is absolutely no. You may have a different answer and that's okay. So we looked at all of these hazards and then we came up with this, the expected annual loss. So if these hazards were to occur, what are we expected the damages to be to the communities? And again, you'll see here that you are very low. And again, the reason is because we don't have a huge population. We don't have any very big population centers. We're all spread out. And so we expect those losses to be fairly low because of those considerations. This right here is the risk index that FEMA generated for all natural hazards. The ones that are blocked out in red are the ones that we considered for this plan. And you'll see that your highest risk, weirdly, is riverine flooding. Now, riverine flooding covers a whole bunch of things. You've also got heat wave on there. But what I found most surprising with this risk index is the low wildfire occurrence, because I think that you guys, with the drought occurrences, with the topography, with what's going on, I thought that wildfire would have been higher. Now, I will say this. We, again, use this as the jumping off point when we wrote your plan. We didn't take this as gospel. We didn't read it as gospel for being 100% right. What we did with this is we took your community input and put another spin on it. We said, hey, FEMA, you know, they know what they're doing. That's great. And we really do appreciate this as a jumping off point. But FEMA doesn't live here. We do. And so what we want to do is we want to take the community input on this and make it our own. And we did that. And what we did is we looked at all of these hazards. Now, you'll see in the left-hand column there is that natural hazard that's identified. The middle column there is, was it included in the state plan? And then the right-hand column is it included in our plan? And you'll see that there are a lot of hazards there that are not included. For example, tsunami SAISH. In order to have a tsunami, you need an ocean. And until California falls into the sea, we ain't got one of those. In order to have a SAISH, you have to have a very big lake. And you have to have a community on that lake that is possibly impacted by that. And again, we don't have that. So that's a hazard that's not considered. We looked at things like tornadoes. Nye County, as I recall, has had 2 tornadoes over the past, I want to say it's 20 years. They were both F0. They both did no damages and did no impact to anybody. And so again, the history of tornadoes is not there for Nye County. And again, the question we always ask ourselves with this is, if we are making our communities safer, are we going to mitigate against tornadoes? And I think the answer from the communities and from speaking to everybody was probably not. But then we looked at other things like winter storms, severe thunderstorms and floods and extreme heat and drought and earthquake. Those are all patently hazards that could happen here and have a history of happening here. And so those are the hazards that we focused on when we were writing your plan. If you get a copy of the plan, whether it be physically or online and review through it, you will see that we have written very big sections on each one of these hazards detailing the location and extent. So the location is, where can this happen? The extent is, how bad can it get? We wrote sections on previous occurrences. So we went back and we did our research and we said, okay, you've had these kind of occurrences of these events. And not only did we did that, we said when they occurred, here's the impact. Here's what they did, the damages, the people they hurt, the people they killed, whatever it may be. We looked at that. We took a look for each hazard on a metric of what's happening with growth, because the more people you have, the more stuff you have, the more risk you have. Then we looked at the impact of climate change. One of the new requirements by FEMA is absolutely looking at the hazards through the lens of climate change. What is it going to do in the future? Is it going to make that hazard worse? Is it going to make it better? What's it going to do? And so each one of these identified hazards has a full write-up on it saying, this is why we think it's a concern. Yes, sir. And I'm sorry, I should have said, I'm always happy to answer these questions. We looked at it, and from conversation, we said we didn't think that it was warranted putting in. Because again, the impacts of it, we couldn't find any sizable impacts that had any sizable occurrence or impact on anybody.
Thank you, sir. So what do you consider as an issue?
There's no metric to it, but again, we're looking for monetary damages to infrastructure, to buildings, and we're looking for an amount of injuries or death caused by it. And one of the data points we use is the NCEI, the National Climatic Environmental Information Centers. They basically say, these are the events that you've had, these are the damages that you've done, these are the injuries and deaths that have been reported from that. And so we look at that as a jumping off point. Again, when we looked at the NRI, the winter storm risk was rated as very low. And then when we looked at the NCEI, we couldn't find any big occurrences in there that said, if someone handed the community a bag of money, is this how they would want to spend it? Now, this is not the end all be all, of course. You know, we worked with other people and talked about it, And I didn't have anybody come to me and say, yeah, winter storm is really big on our radar.
So you know that FEMA is working with us on flood control,
Yes, on flood control.
which is contributed by weather
Yes,
and snowfall.
kind of. The answer is kind of yes. And I do understand that. But there are two conflated issues there. A big snowstorm in a mountain region that's not necessarily Nye County can contribute to flooding down here 100%. But the hazard at that point isn't the winter storm. The hazard is the flooding after the winter storm. We recognize that they're somehow tied together. And in fact, in the plan itself, one of the things we look at is what is global warming going to do to flooding based on snow occurrence? Are there going to be fewer snowfall events, less snow that happens, in which case it may lessen the amount of runoff we get? So we do look at it through that lens, but we didn't identify the winter storm itself as the hazard. After the winter storm, the flood is definitely the hazard.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yep, and we've got flood 100% in there, squarely in there.
So Commissioner, we look at from the winter storm as more like an immediate nuisance versus a sense of paralysis based on the storm itself.
I'm looking at it after
Yeah,
everything's over. For the simple reason is the snow melt that we had was contributed to this flood,
100%.
which was a lot more than we normally have because we're doing things to force that.
Yep.
and that's where the flooding events come into the play.
Yep.
Coupled with additional precipitation or an overabundance of snowpack that we all of a sudden have an elevated temperature, so it doesn't have a chance to melt off in a reasonable time period. It's all at once.
Yeah, and it is written up in the climate section about that hey, this is what we think climate change is going to do to snowfall events. One of the things that we found is that it may shorten what we consider to be winter, and so maybe you have higher snowfall events, but fewer of them, and then you have a longer fall, longer springtime. It's complex.
Yeah, for the last couple of years, it's been a little bit different.
Yes, yeah, no, last year was a mess. There's no doubt about that. Okay, so again, one of the things we did is we looked at your capabilities too. One of the things that we wanted to know is what can you do? What are your response capabilities? And so we took a big look at that. But really one of the big things we wanted to look at was your mitigation capabilities. Do you have building codes? Do you have comprehensive plans? Do you have an emergency operations plan? Again, all of these things were used to inform this hazard mitigation plan, with the hope being that this hazard mitigation plan informs all of these documents. Now, when we talk, when we talk about those capabilities, the big ones are building codes and zoning ordinances. You can't build certain places, and when you do build, we want you to have up to standards, whether it be retrofitting to earthquake standards, whether it be high wind standards. We want to make sure you have that. So those are the capabilities that we're looking at. And again, those are included in the plan, because one of the things we want to know is what can we realistically do? We don't want to prepare any actions and say, hey, we'd like to do this, if we don't have the capability to do that. We want to stay within our means, because that is the best chance of getting hazard mitigation action items completed. Now, going forward, what are we asking? We're going to submit the plan to the state, and the state will give us feedback on that. The more eyes that we get on this, the more feedback we get. I have zero problem with that. I have zero ego with that. And so the state will review this and they'll say, hey, we'd like you to think about this, or have you thought about that? And we will work with them and make any recommended changes that they are suggesting. We will then submit the plan to FEMA, and FEMA will then take a look at the plan and they will have changes. Now, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the state will say, hey, we like this plan and it looks great and we'd like to submit it on. And we're very happy with that. We're very happy with that. But we have no ego if they say something different. FEMA is the same way. Sometimes FEMA will say, plan looks great, we're good. Sometimes FEMA will say, we'd like you to make some changes, whether they are small changes. Most of the time, they're small changes, quite truthfully. And again, we will make those changes for them. Once that is done, FEMA approves the plan pending adoption. And that means that the plan has been approved, but it now needs to be adopted by each participating jurisdiction. No adoption, You are not covered by the plan. And again, the adoption is a simple process. All you have to do is have a resolution of adoption in front of your, whatever it may be, town board, county commission, whatever it may be. That's how we adopt the plan. Now, in adopting the plan, I know that we had a whole lot of folks participate from jurisdictions that don't have boards, that have no way of doing a resolution to pass them. That does not mean that they are not considered participating in this plan. It's just that when the county adopts, they are adopting as an umbrella organization over them. These are the people that we need to adopt independently. They are the ones that have a board or a commission or a council that can adopt. And so when the time comes, we're going to need them to go in and adopt the plan.
Yeah, they're elected town boards.
Yeah. So as with an elected town board, you can actually pass a resolution of adoption. So that's why we need them to pass this plan. Once you pass the plan, you guys are covered for 5 years. You have a 5-year coverage with this plan. And then 5 years from now, what we do, or actually 4 years from now, we go in and we start writing the plan again, hoping that we've completed a lot of these actions, that we've made safer, more resilient communities as we move forward.
Matt, could you briefly review any event that a particular jurisdiction is reluctant to complete a resolution, what our options are?
Yeah, so once your jurisdiction has adopted the plan, you're considered covered by that. If a jurisdiction does not want to adopt the plan for whatever reason it may be, we would then go to FEMA and say, this jurisdiction is not adopting. We'd like to take them off the adopting list. Here are all the adopting jurisdictions. They will approve the plan, noting that that one jurisdiction did not adopt. But again, it's a simple process, and having gone through all this work with me, I hope that all of you will adopt the plan, because boy, it's that final bow right there. Okay, so we have one more thing. This is our public input survey, and we've had really good feedback from this. I've been really impressed by how many people have given their feedback on this, but it's still not too late. You can go into publicinput.com/E5822. It's not a convenient name, I freely admit it, but that's what they gave us. And you can actually fill out an online survey where you can put your comments in concerning hazard mitigation planning. And again, we really do look at that public feedback to help shape the plan, and it's not too late to do it. So this is where that site is. If you'd like to say something or put some comments in there, please do so. Now, with what we're doing now, we are going to end that period, that comment period, next Monday. Now, we'll leave the comments open still, but what we're going to do right around next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, somewhere in there, we're going to close this plan up and we're going to submit it to the state for their review. So that'll be at the state for review. At that point, we don't do any substantive revisions to it. We'll do the revisions that the state, if they ask, we'll do those revisions, but we won't do any substantive revisions. And then again, we submit that on to FEMA, and at that point, the plan, we consider it to be closed. But truthfully, it's never a closed plan, because there's always things that we can change. And one of the goals of this plan is to make it a living document, that when we do this next time, we've been doing iterations of this for the past 5 years, and it's super easy to do. Okay, so that's what I've got for you. Any questions that I can answer for any of you? The easiest way to probably do it is just unmute your mic and say, hey, Matt, what do you think about this? And I'll tell you what I think.
Hello, Matt.
Hi, who's this?
It's Erica and Beatty.
Hi, Erica, how are you?
So I'm okay. Blustery day here in Beatty, and that's one of my points. So let me just say a couple of things first before I get to my questions. Your brain may be in New Mexico, but your heart is always going to be in Nye County.
That's absolutely right. I do. I've been traveling so much for the past couple of weeks. I'm not sure if it's Tuesday. I must be in Walla Walla, Washington.
Also, I'd just like to thank Chief Lewis and his teams again for their response during Hurricane Hillary, because their response plan was very, very good. So here's my questions. All the data that this is based on is historical, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so here's kind of one of the things that I see as a problem. Things are changing so fast that maybe wind wasn't a historical problem, but it's definitely a problem now, and events are getting stronger and more frequent. So how
Yeah.
do we, how do we factor in future potential
Yeah.
events?
So Erica, a fantastic question. So we actually do a couple of things here. The first one is in one of the sections of the plan, we talk about what's changed and what is changing for the county. So are we getting bigger, smaller? Do we have more stuff? Do we have less stuff? What's the stuff worth? You know, we put all that together, and what we try to do is prognosticate what's happening to the county so that we can understand or try to understand what the risk is carrying forward. If we're growing and getting lots of new folks, then the risk is going to expand theoretically because we have more people and more stuff exposed to those hazards. So we look at that and we try to frame it that way. And then using that historical data, what we do is we look at a very big period of time, 20 years, 20 plus years there, where we say, okay, how many events have we had? And then we look at the frequency of those occurring, you know, closer to our time frame. Have they been accelerating? And so again, that gives us an idea. And then the third thing we do is we look at that as a part of climate change. What is climate change going to do to exacerbate these hazards? And so we said, hey, you know, if we look at a hazard like earthquake, climate change isn't going to do much on earthquakes, right? But if we do look at a hazard like flooding, what is climate change going to do for flooding? And the idea is that it may cause more significant rainfall events. And by that, I mean, it's going to rain an awful lot for a very short period of time. Now, in between, there may be fewer rainfall events, but it's those very substantive, those very hardcore rain events that we're worried about, because that tends to cause flooding. And again, we do the same thing with something like dam failure. Now, Nye County doesn't have any high hazard dams. A high hazard dam is a dam that, if it fails, is going to cause a loss of life or substantial property damage. But Nye County does have 2 significant hazard dams. And so we put that in there because those significant plans have an emergency action plan. But that's too much. What we actually looked at is, again, with those dams, if we have more sincere rainfall events, short periods of sincere rainfall, that tends to put more stress on that infrastructure. And so that may cause a problem further down the line, because if we're stressing this infrastructure over and over again, is that eventually going to cause a failure event? So we try as best as we can, Erica, to prognosticate what is going to happen in the future. You know, my crystal ball sometimes gets a little bit hazy with it, but we do the best we can to look forward and say, this is what we can expect over the next 5 years.
Okay, very good. So my crystal ball does the same thing. One last thing. Can you explain to me what the special wind zone that we're in is?
Yeah, you're in a special wind zone. So it's you guys are known to ramp your winds up exponentially for short periods of time. It's not necessarily a rare occurrence, but it doesn't occur with the frequency of those other wind zones that you see identified on that map. So again, they recognize that winds can ramp up pretty good here, but it's not with the frequency of occurrence that it does in the center of the United States. And technically they're looking for things like derechos and tornadoes, or on the East Coast where they're looking at hurricane force winds.
Well, we had some of those, like, you know, a month or so ago. So there's always that. But thank you very much for answering my questions.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking those questions.
Yeah, Beatty and Amagosa are heavy in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's covered under the thunderstorm hazard of the plan, where we looked at, you know, one of the things that FEMA likes to see, or now likes to see, is conglomerating potential hazards together. So we put together thunderstorms, which is hail, lightning, and high winds. And under those high winds, that's where those categories come in. severe thunderstorm winds tends to be the highest category of winds.
And the northern portion of the county has got the highest amount of snowfall, which causes the biggest amount of problems.
Yeah,
Hopefully that's been included in here, because that means a lot of road closures and a lot of other problems with people who can't get out of their homes to go somewhere.
right. Other questions I can answer for anyone?
Matt?
Hello, yes.
Hi, this is Carrie over at the
Hi,
Baby Town
Carrie.
office. Your conversation about dams brought something to mind, and I apologize, I didn't see it in the report. Does this address highway bridges that cross bodies of water?
So
and the potential issues with that?
So it does not, because we didn't have a mapping of all of your bridges as to what they are. When we looked at critical infrastructure, we tended to look at hospitals, emergency response, fire, police, EMS, those type of things. If we had a mapping, and we looked around for it, but we couldn't find it of all your bridges, we could mark those on there. Again, the challenge with that is that, as I recall, no big active river systems. And so what you tend to have is those flash floods. So,
Right.
you know, we're not worried about, I couldn't find an incidence of a bridge failure. That was where we jumped
Nope.
off on. I couldn't find one. And so,
Yeah.
you know, so the answer is, it's not, we do talk about that travel infrastructure in there, but it's not a specific point that we talk about. And one of the things we would say is that if there is a particular bridge that you were worried about, we would recommend that you identify that bridge and put it in as an action item to have that bridge replaced, repaired, whatever it may be, under your mitigation action items.
Okay, because the only reason is and this is it goes back way far outside of your 20-year horizon, to the late 60s and early 70s, where the bridge that crosses the Amargosa River during a flood event caused a pretty big problem in Beatty. So I was just curious. Okay, thank you.
We recognize it. We recognize that that's a potential problem. You know, we would address that under what we would consider to be infrastructure failure if we identify that as a man-made hazard in the plan.
Carrie, this is Scott. So when you're talking about I'm not sure that's designated an actual bridge versus a road surface with undermined culverts running through it for drainage purposes. An actual bridge is actually something that's designated with the specific term bridge attached to it. Unless there's something.
Yeah, I mean, it is a bridge. It's not. It's not culverts. I mean, it's a bridge, but
Okay.
I don't know what it's designated as.
Is that on the 95?
Yeah, it is. It's on 95. It's just north of the center of town, about 4 miles north of the center of town. It's right,
Again,
right, by,
Carrie,
the end, right by the end.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Anything else I can answer for you guys? All right. Well, I want to say thank you very much, and I mean this genuinely, for being involved in the process. You guys have all been great. You know, when I asked for something, when we talked about things, you guys actively engaged in the conversations. You answered the questions that I had for you. You helped really shape and write this plan, which I think is fantastic, because this is a community plan for you to use. One of the things that we tried to do, and I hope we succeeded on, is when we were writing this plan, we tried to make it very usable for you. We didn't want a whole lot of fluff in there. We tried to make it a lean plan that is usable for each community, that provides what we think is valuable information to help you when you're shaping policies, plans, and procedures in the future. So this is a credit to you, and I want to say thank you for being part of it.